G'day, Jinx here, and welcome to my next Doom tutorial. This time, I'm going to be talking about the Doom palette, and by extension, the Playpal Lump and ColourMaps and, all that stuff. Now, this tutorial's main focus is going to be on how to create custom graphics. So textures, sprites, title screens, all that kind of stuff, and then convert it to the doomPal so they all look good in your Doom WODs. I should note though that if you are targeting uzDoom and a few of the other advanced engines, you can basically ignore all this palette stuff, as those engines can actually utilize full color RGB graphics. But everything else you see coming from the Doom community uses paletted images. So just before we get into it, let's have a quick overview of what the Doom palette is, how it works, and why it exists. So if you go to the Doom wiki and type in Playpal, you'll get to this page here. And this basically tells you everything you need to know. To put it really simply, the Playpal is a collection of 14 palettes, and each palette is just a set of 256 colors. And when any particular palette is loaded, that's the only colors available in Doom. No other colors can be used. Now, most of the time you're looking at PAL 0, which is this thing here, okay? So most of the time you're looking at PAL 0 and nothing else. Now, it might be easier to show you this using Slade. So if you load up Slade and just load up your Doom iWOD, you'll find the Playpal and just click on Playpal and you can see the palettes. So this is PAL 0. Now, in Slade, for some reason, it calls it 1 to 14. But if you're looking at any technical information about Doom, it's going to be listed as 0 to 13. And that's because, so you can see here, palette 0, palette 13. And that's because C++ tables are defined from 0, not from 1. That's all that means. So I'm not quite sure why they chose to do it this way. I guess they thought it would be easier for people, but I just find it confusing because there's two different ways of talking about the same thing. When I say PAL 0, or PAL 13, I'm talking about palette 1 or palette 14 in Slade. Anyway, this is just an index table. And what that means is in Doom, you're not actually looking at physical color data. There's no bitmap or whatever representing this table. It's just a data table inside the programming. And it's indexed. So if we look over here on the Doom wiki, you can see the index values here. So this black is index 0 or first in the table, and this sort of red is 175. And what this means is anytime I change any of these colors in the index, it'll change any color in Doom that is using that index color. So say 175 here, right? That's like a nice red. If I change that color, any sprite or graphic or bitmap or anything that is using color 175 will now use whatever new color I had. So for example, this is the doomPal 1, but if I load up Neon Overdrive, which is a famous mod, and I click on the Playpal, you can see how it's a completely different palette. And that's what makes that WOD looks, that kind of cyberpunky, purpley kind of colors, is because they're the colors of the palette. I mean, obviously they've drawn all their custom graphics with this palette in mind as well. So the graphics are drawn more purple, but there's also a lot of original graphics, especially in monster sprites, that are just coming out purple because of the index color changes. So if I find here's our Caco Demon. So if I find that same one in Doom, look how different they look. And the actual bitmaps themselves are not different. It's just the index colors. Each pixel in these bitmaps is assigned an index value, and those index values are pointing to different colors because color 1 in the doomPal is not the same color as color 1 in the Neon Overdrive pal. That's basically what the Playpal is. It's just a series of palettes. There's 14 of them to be exact. One thing to remember when you start editing your palettes is that because of the index color system, a lot of these colors are sort of structured and sort of fixed inside the palette. And what I mean by that, for example, you can see these ramps. If I just load up the tweak color tool, it's a bit easier because I can like drag select. So see this ramp here and this ramp here. See how these are all ramps? So this brown ramp actually goes all the way down to this second line, for example. These color ramps are there for a reason. Now, if I just go into Photoshop, I have a script, which I'll just quickly run while I'm talking. And what this script is doing is it's extracting similar and identical colors out of this palette. And this is one of the real tricks you can do when you're editing your palette. The doomPal has a whole bunch of colors that are literally identical, and another whole bunch of colors that are very, very similar, perceptually identical. So if I just close these down, if I look at identical colors, these colors are literally identical. So these two blacks, identical colors. These two blues, identical colors. These whites are all identical. These colors are identical. These colors are identical. They're literally not different at all. And these colors here are perceptually identical. They are technically different colors, but they basically look exactly the same. I can adjust my script to be a bit more lenient, but if I remap these colors, and of course if I remap the identical colors, there's no perceptual changes to what the graphics look like in game, which means that when you're creating your colors, you can reclaim these. You can actually completely remove them and replace them with anything you want. And if we look at the Evternity WOD, you can see that this color map is a little more like a Rubik's Cube because they've done a lot of these individual color changes because it's a very complicated WOD. Now, doing this is hard to do, especially if you're also going to look at similar colors. The problem is that the original graphics are all linked to the original palette. So a great example is Spectrum Descent, which is a fantastic WOD. If I look at Spectrum Descent, you can see this color ramp, this sort of purple color ramp here. In Simulacrum, it's brown. In Blues Brothers 2025, it's brown. In Neon Overdrive, it's brown to purple. In Doom, it's brown. And this is because if you want to use original graphics without editing them at all, you kind of have to respect these color ramps, because not only do these color ramps provide the different values to create the shading on the bitmaps, they are also used with the default color maps to control the lighting. But you can still go wild with all your reclaimed pixels if you want to really cram as many unique colors into your palette as you can. Take a look at Evternity 2. This green, 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 and this green in Evternity is basically a color ramp, but just spread out all over the place. Now, this is obviously possible, but it is complicated, especially when you get to the creation of your color maps, which I'm going to talk about later. If I go to create a new WOD, I'll call it Pal Show, and I go to Spectrum Descent, and I'm going to copy the Playpal from Spectrum Descent and chuck it in here and save it. Okay, so now I've got the Spectrum Descent with this purple ramp where everybody else, even Evternity, has a kind of brown ramp. If I go into Doom and I just grab TRO and I grab the imp and I copy this into here, boom, he's a purple imp. And he's a good looking purple imp because not only have we changed the ramp to a new color, the new colors respect the same graduation of color, which means the shading of the sprite still looks good, but it's just a new color. That's why this purple imp looks pretty damn cool, because it's respecting the structure of the original palette. But when we're playing Spectrum Descent, they still appear brown. And that's because the brown color ramp is still here. They've just moved it. So if I go into the Spectrum Descent WOD and I grab that imp, and I copy him in, you can see that he's going to stay brown while the Doom one came in purple. But if I go to the Doom one and I export this as a PNG, so graphic export as PNG, and then I import this into the WOD, for starters, it's coming in looking fine because it's Slade, which supports uzDoom and all those kind of things, is actually, if you look, it's a graphic PNG. So this is an RGB image. It hasn't been palletized yet. So if I then convert this, so I go right click, graphic, convert to, and I convert it to the Spectrum Descent palette, save, you can see it now looks identical. So all of these now look the same. So this image here is copied directly from Doom into here. So it's a paletted image from Doom, pasted into this, and it turns purple. This one here is exported from Doom and then imported into my WAD and repaletted, remapped to the new Playpal. What I'm trying to get at here is that it doesn't really matter where your colors are as long as you understand how to retain shading and lighting, because the process of importing and converting your true color images will map them to whatever they are, which is what was happening in Eviternity with its real crazy looking palette. The reason why they did this at all is because, as you can see, when you look at an original Doom graphic that hasn't been repaletized, it comes out purple. So by changing this row here, any textures, any graphics that use that row are going to be colored into a nice purple color, and then they've just re-imported and repaletized to their custom palette any textures or any sprites that they wanted to have the original Doom colors. And that allows them, when you play the WAD, to have these amazing purple environments, because all the brown colors and stuff are basically just, you know, purple instead, you know, like this guy here. Even though there are all these similar and identical colors, unless you're willing to rebuild a lot of your textures and a lot of your graphics, or create all your own new stuff, like if we look at Neon Overdrive, which has the brownie sort of purple in the same space, and we type tro, there is no imp. In Simulacrum, there's no imp. In Eviternity, they've remapped the imp. So the imp has been re-imported into Eviternity to match the new Eviternity palette. But Neon Overdrive, which is a drastically altered palette, it does not have an imp because it's respected the original shades. So what I'm basically saying is, especially when you're starting out, if you respect the original palette structure, you're going to have a much easier time of it. And there's actually multiple palettes inside the Playpal. There's actually 14 different palettes to be precise. The ones that are, in my opinion, the most interesting are PAL 0 and PAL 13. So PAL 0 is what you look at, like that's the normal colors. There's this other thing called ColourMaps, and I'll get into that later, but PAL 0 is what you see when you're looking normally in Doom. And then PAL 1 to 8 or 2 to 9 in Slade is just PAL 0 with different levels of intensity of red tint. That's the damage flash. So when you're shot by a rocket and it flashes that red, what you're physically seeing is Doom Engine changing the color palette completely, which changes all the graphics you're looking at. And it just flashes, you know, depending on how much damage you take, it'll flash a different palette. So if you're doing your custom palette, you just make your custom palette and then you just make a bunch of versions of it with different levels of red overlay to create your damage flash. Then from 9 to 12 or 10 to 13 in Slade is exactly the same thing. So it's the PAL 0 just with an overlaying color, but this time it's gold. And this is your item flash. And it's pretty subtle in game, but it does exist. That's when you pick up an item, it kind of flashes the screen a little just to give you a bit of visual reference along with the noise of pickup. So basically, palette, oh God, it's so confusing because it's got different values. But palette 1 to palette 12 or palette 2 to palette 13 in Slade are just PAL 0 with different shades shading every pixel. But they're still editable. And remember, these are actual full palettes. They're not color remapping of the index values of the old palette. And that means you can put any colors you want in here and they don't have to match anything else in any of your other palettes. By default, they're just sort of these overlaying colors, but you could really do anything you wanted here. Like you could make every single pixel a different color, for example, if you wanted to do it. Just need a reason to, some clever way of utilizing that in your WAD. I mean, if you want to have a bright orange sort of screen Like say you're doing a post-apocalyptic wad and you're setting it out in like a Fallout style desert, and instead of having a red damage flash, you want to have a sort of orangey damage flash. I mean, you can make it any colors you want. The other interesting one besides PAL 0 is PAL 13 or 14 in Slade. This is the Radsuit effect. When you put on the Radsuit, it actually physically changes the entire palette into a kind of green tint. So if I go to palette 0, that's the normal one, and then that is the Radsuit one, right? That's how the Radsuit effect tints everything green. One of the interesting things about the Radsuit palette, by the way, is that it's not just an overlaying color like the damage maps, which are just overlaying red over everything at various levels of intensity. If you look at the Radsuit palette, you'll see that it's a lot subtler. What they've kind of done is that they've shaded each individual ramp a different level of green tint. And that's what creates a much nicer looking, version of the reality of the game, but green, than say the damage palette, which is almost like a blinding flash. And that's just something to keep in mind when you're creating your own Radsuit palettes. The other really interesting thing is that the invulnerability effect isn't actually a palette. That is actually a color map, or part of the color map. And I'll talk about color maps a bit later. But what this means is basically when you're doing your editing, you only really need to worry about the PAL 0. That's the main one. Then you want to make a slightly green one, or you might want to have an orange looking Radsuit, whatever. There's a different palette for the Radsuit. So there's 2 that you need to worry about. And then the damage frames and the item pickup frames are literally just a tint. So you can make that tint any color you want, but usually it's just red. So let's have a quick look at the Neon Overdrive. And this is the Radsuit for Neon Overdrive. So this is PAL 13. And you can see it's very different to PAL 13 for Doom, but of course it's going to be different because they are using different PAL 0s. But if you look at Neon Overdrive, all the other palettes are exactly the same as the doomPal. They're just PAL 0 with different levels of shading, global shading across every single pixel, I should add, to make the flashes. Now let's just load up Slade again, and I'm going to go into our PAL show wad that I was talking about the imps with. I'm just going to delete all that stuff out. And I'm not going to go too deep into this because I want to talk about Slade's extensive tools later on when I'm talking about the actual editing of the graphics. But while we're talking about the palettes and the creations and the editing of your palettes, it should be noted that, like say, if I go to Spectrum Descent and I export out this palette, I'm going to export it as a PNG, and I've already saved this palette out here as Spectrum PAL 0. If I want to input that into a WAD, I can actually just go right click, new entry, select palette, and I'm just going to call it Playpal. And I'm going to say existing global as the palette base, right? And there are other options you can do. So what this has done, if I save that, is now we have, if you look here, it says, instead of saying 1 of 14, it just says 1 of 1. So we have a single palette. We can't move it to the other 13 palettes. And it's been created using the original Doom 2 WAD, which I have set as my base resource up here. But what I can actually do is I can come into this import from button, hit import, and I can import from a number of sources, but I like to use PNG images. And I can just import that palette from Spectrum Descent. So now, if I go to the Spectrum Descent, you can see that they're exactly the same. I've imported the Spectrum Descent palette into my new inverted commas WAD. But again, we still only have one palette here. But Slade has a very cool tool where you can actually generate the other palettes. Because remember, these palettes are basically just, levels of red, then levels of gold, and then a slightly greener one. So if you right click on the Playpal that it is now, go down to palette, there's a button called Generate Palettes. Just click that, boom. We're going to use the 14 palettes from Doom. Hexen has 28 palettes, by the way. And just go OK, blammo. And you can see now it's created the other ones for us. So we don't even need to create them if we don't want to. It's even made green one for us. And if we look at Spectrum Descent, you can see that this is exactly how they've created their extra palettes off their own custom PAL 0. They've literally used this technique. So if I go to palette 12, you can see they're identical. Let's go to palette 6. And you can see they're identical as well. So what I'm getting at here is really PAL 0 is the palette that you want to focus all your time on. That's the colors you see the most. And you can use Slade to generate the standard look for the other palettes from your PAL 0. And I'll talk about this later on in the video, but you can actually even right click on it, go to palette and go generate color maps and get a color map based upon your PAL 0, which is a good place to start. Most modders edit the color map extensively to match their palette. So if you look at the Spectrum Descent, you can see it's very, very different color map. But even so, clicking on the Playpal, you can generate your palettes and they're very usable. And you can also right click and generate a primary color map, which is very handy to use as the base for your color map. You can then edit that without having to manually create a color map yourself. Okay, so we're going to stop here for a sec. Originally, this video was designed to be a single video. And the idea is that having a single video that you could just share and it have all the information in it. And then people could jump around in the table of contents. That's how I've been designing my tutorials. But this tutorial came out long, and I mean real long. It was so long, in fact, that the table of contents was too many characters to fit in the YouTube description. So I'm going to split this tutorial into a series now, and we're going to stop here. The problem is, though, unfortunately, is because I don't really write scripts or anything. I just like talk, yabber on while I'm fiddling on the screen. So there is some information that is kind of, you know, in the next section, I'm going to be talking about color maps, but I'm still going to be mentioning stuff about the Playpal. And frankly, I just don't want to redo everything. So that's a bit unfortunate. But still, I hope there was information there that might be helpful. And I will see you guys next time.